this is something we try to do special for the people that are staying overnight here at Reelfoot to enhance what the park does for the area and what we can kind of quality programs we can provide for you. My name is Jerry Hall. I'm one of the naturalists, and tonight we got a special program from our state naturalist, Mack Prichard. He's going to be doing a program on eagles and wetlands here around this area. We have a lot of those two things, so he's going to be talking some about Reelfoot and some just generally about probably Tennessee and some touch on a lot of other things. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Mack Prichard up here.
Great to be at Reelfoot, and all of you scouts and all of you folks and friends from Dyersburg, and I see Alvin Markham from Tiptonville, and all. This is, as we all know, a wonderful place at Reelfoot Lake, created by the earthquake and still enjoyed by all, by the eagles and the fish and the Mississippi River here that we have. It's just one of the great spots. In West Tennessee, Reelfoot Lake is the epitome of the Deep South. In Middle Tennessee, we have parks like Savage Gulf, which have virgin forest and the rivers that flow toward the Ohio Valley. And then in East Tennessee, we have Roan Mountain, over 6,000 feet high, which is like the Smokies in New England. And so we're blessed with really incredible diversity. But down here at this end, this is the richest soil we have. It comes from the overflow of the river, and that's what nourishes the fish and nourishes the eagles and brings us all back here again. Back in a couple of 3 issues back of the Conservationist magazine, we had a story on Silent Spring and pictures of Reelfoot Lake showing how years past the eagles here were almost rubbed out, really by the chemicals and by overhunting and by the problems that wildlife face nowadays, which is pollution, technocracy, and sometimes greed. So as every Boy Scout knows, that to do our good deeds, we need to help wildlife. And one of the great things is the Endangered Species Act, and volunteers like you and me and the bird watchers have helped to hack out 284 eagles in Tennessee. When I say hack, I mean they brought young eagles that had either had their parents shot or fell out of the nest, and they brought them from up north, where they didn't have the poison, the chemical residue of DDT. And they started the eagles back again, because eagles here had nested here until about 1961. That was the last successful nest we had until about 1983. And so during that period, DDT was banned in 1972, and gradually began to bring the eagles back alive. So I'm going to ask if we can have our lights down. We'll go ahead. If you're not in a spot where you can see, we'll move around. And this side over here, you actually see towboats higher on this side than on that side, just by a few inches. It's amazing as the river is falling on down its way. Reelfoot at one time was the main stem of the Mississippi, and it's gradually eaten its way over here into these bluffs. These high grounds to the east of Reelfoot Lake were laid down by wind from the glaciers that blew from the Texas plains, and it picked up dust along the Mississippi and gradually blew it to the east, and some of it's 100 feet thick. It covered Ice Age mastodons and elephants in the gravel pits over here. It covered up a lot of other area and made a wonderful fertile band of soil. I'm sure this microphone's going to work, but Ken, I don't believe it's working. So we'll just talk with you. I believe you can see. Now, over the years, Reelfoot Lake has been a great drawing card for a lot of people. The folks who lived here developed a lot of names, like you see here: Walnut Gap, Rat Island, Donaldson Ditch, Swan Basin. We had swans here. We've had swans come back lately. Somebody shot one south of here. We hope next time they won't get such a hostile reception and maybe the swans will come back. The Reelfoot's loaded with stories. You can see an eagle's eye view as we fly over the edge of Samberg down below here. You can see that bluff line, which at one time the Mississippi River was right up against that bluff, and that's what's eating it down. And you see the upper and lower Blue Basin. You see how the islands are filled in gradually as the old Mississippi River channels have been abandoned. There's the river in the distance. And then as we take a look with the snow we had on the ground here in the last few days, we can see the lower end of Big Blue Basin, down here at Blue Bank, the washout. And where does the water go? It stops right here, because what you're looking at is part of that big Tiptonville dome, that uplift that all across here blocked the outlay of the river. So the river channel just was stopped in its tracks, and instead portions of the basin here sunk, and areas over here where the fault line runs. It runs pretty much through this way. You can see in this map, here's the main fault really running right along Blue Bank out here. Then it cuts across the Mississippi. Right here, when the earthquake struck, the fault line created a waterfall in the Mississippi, which lasted about 2 weeks. You can imagine that. Fortunately, the New Orleans steamboat had tied off that night at New Madrid, Missouri, and they were able to get up steam and get off away from the riverbank, which fell over on the boat. This was in 1811, I believe December 16, and the earthquake was so damaging that the boat was barely able to pick its way through. Now, the grandfather of Teddy Roosevelt was the captain of that boat. We have eyewitness accounts, as you've read in here, about how bad it was. But that fault line is still there. That's the biggest tear line and the biggest earthquake that we've known in North America. And it's still there. It could happen again sometime. It probably will. We don't know when. But we do know this, that as the Mississippi River has worked its way in the headward erosion, it's sort of followed the crack, the weak spot. And that's what we see here as the continent of North America has split and then gone back together. You have this great Gulf of Mexico down at the bottom. So the whole area here was sort of set up by the forces of nature. And that's why today we have this wonderful place, which is one of the great U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuges. This is the 100th anniversary of our National Wildlife Refuge system here, which began at Reelfoot Lake in 1941 with the lease of that refuge, and in 1938 with Lake Isom. So this is one of the early ones. Actually, our most incredible president, Teddy Roosevelt, set aside the first refuge, Pelican Island, in 1903. And since then, we have 535 refuges that have been added, the greatest number of any country in the world. We're very blessed with these, and that's what makes an interesting refuge for people here as well, because the Air Park, which we've had these lectures at for many years, and this upper part of the Upper Blue Basin, or part of the area here that's featured in that magazine article. Mr. Albert Markham's here tonight. His ancestor here, Mr. Harris, J.C. Harris, is that right? Was the farmer and gentleman who had a great foresight to know that the fertile soil here was the best anywhere, and he finally was able to buy out most of the lake of Reelfoot Lake, and his plans were to make the world's largest cotton patch and farm here. And he would have succeeded, but he couldn't get the last little tract under the lake, and so instead they created a syndicate here. And for a time the syndicate regulated the amount of fishing and hunting that came out through their boat dock. However, finally the local people here who had always had access to the lake became outraged by it. They put on their robes one night after midnight. They took two of the lawyers for the company, the syndicate, from the Walnut Log Lodge over there, and they took him out and said, "We want access to the lake." They took this fellow and put a noose around his neck and hung him off of that tree, pulled him off the ground, and said, "We want access to the lake." And he said, "You're choking me." So they let him back down, I'm told. And he said what he probably shouldn't have said. Well, most lawyers would have said, "If you want access to the lake, I'll check on that and get back with you in a few days." You know how lawyers are. But instead he was very honest. He said, "I can't possibly do anything about that." Well, that happened about 3 or 4 times. They pulled him off the ground. Finally somebody's shotgun went off. And when this fellow saw what happened to his buddy, he decided the best thing he could do was get out of there. So he squeezed out of their grip, jumped in the Bayou de Chien and swam under a hail of shotgun slugs, and everybody thought they killed him. So they went on home, but he didn't. He managed to escape. He walked all night until he got across the state line into Kentucky and escaped. And then the governor sent this posse out, and they tried for about a year to find the people who were doing the night riding, who were responsible for this, but nobody would say anything on anybody over here. Finally, they appealed to whether this lake was navigable, whether it could be drained or not, and they hired a guy named Southworth from Union City to take pictures. And Mr. Harris also hired him, and he said, obviously that's not a navigable waterway, And so Mr. Southwood took that picture to show how many stumps that were left from the earthquake. And then the state of Tennessee also used some of the Southwest pictures to say, well, this was an old bend of the river, it must be now. So back and forth the argument went. This was in around 1911, 1912. And finally the Supreme Court said if the state of Tennessee wants access to the public of this lake, they need to buy it from the owner. So the state of Tennessee then filed a condemnation, and in 1913, by 1914, I believe Reelfoot Lake was bought for, was it $36,000? Not very much money, but it was acquired. And that's how we came to have our first game fish and park refuge here in Tennessee in 1914. Now to get around on Reelfoot Lake people have developed this ingenious rowboat with bow-faced oars. And there's one even with a saw blade or a rudder. So when it runs over those stumps, all you do is just zip over them and sit low in the water, and you don't capsize. You can see the lady over here at the Fish and Wildlife headquarters demonstrating these remarkable oars. I always wondered about, in the world, you should be able to row backwards and somehow turn around and imagine you're not going to run into somebody. Certainly can't do that here at Reelfoot. But this is what we have here. This is the boats that are built by Mr. Calhoun across the road here. If you hadn't gone over and seen his boat building, you better hurry, because he's, like me, he's getting on and getting a little weary at it. But boat building here has been a tradition of this sort for a long time. The Fish and Wildlife Service has a wonderful visitor center museum over on the eastern side of the lake, just off of the Highway 22. You haven't been over to see that, like the exhibits here, they're well worth your while. And right behind this building is the live eagle demonstration area, where you can see injured birds that can't survive on the wild. We've taken them in, we give them free fish, and they think it's kind of neat here. So our naturalist staff take them around, show them the schools. And this lady is looking at a Civilian Conservation Corps marker, because about 1925 is when the State Park Commission set aside the law that set up Reelfoot Lake as Tennessee's first game and fish and park area. And the Civilian Conservation Corps right after that, from 1933 to 1937, were building the picnic shelters over here at Blue Bank, and that's how we came to have this wonderful area here. There are a number of other refuges. Lake Isom was deeded to the federal government in 1938 on a lease basis. Reelfoot in 1941. Since then, Kentucky Tennessee Wildlife Refuge in 1945. Cross Creeks back then and in the 80s, and Hatchie River 1980, and we have a lower Hatchie River as well. So we're blessed with a half a dozen refuges. Now the reason we had to set these areas aside in the old days, I was born in Dyersburg. That's why I'm glad to see some home folks here tonight. But my dad remembers when they would go out and hunt ducks. And when he came back with a bag of limited ducks in the old days, it was a big bag. In fact, he remembers when they'd shoot 80 doves a day. That was before there were game laws, because there were plenty of birds. And in those days, people didn't think much about it. But like the passenger pigeons, before long, we shot most of them out. And that's why groups like Ducks Unlimited and efforts across the state and across the country have formed. Ducks Unlimited has raised about $200 million, most of which they've sent now to Canada to help save the wetland country up there where they don't have the wildlife refuges that we have. So they do a lot of restoration, a lot of wildlife enhancement. And what, of course, appreciates that is more ducks. And our wood duck, which is our common Tennessee native nesting bird, is one of our most colorful in the world. I guess the mandarins are somewhat like it. And of course, more than waterfowl and ducks come to Reelfoot. Today we saw deer running over on the other side of the valley. Looked like about 10,000, 15,000 geese. And we have a lot of wildlife here, not only deer, but we have otter as well. In fact, our wildlife agency has released over 500 otter and restocked a lot of Tennessee otters, which were trapped out around the turn of the century because of their fur, which is very nice and expensive. We got a lot of catfish. We all know what good catfish is. It's not just up across the boyets, and you know what they can do with it. The catfish are not too much into that, so they are pretty good at hiding out. We also have the spoon-billed catfish, or paddlefish, as it's called here, a very primitive fish. You can see it uses that long bill to stir up the sediment on the bottom and catch bottom-dwelling bugs and critters that it enjoys. And one of the largest of these, almost a 100-pound one, was actually, it stuck its bill up into the pontoon boat and couldn't get away, and so it was bagged by our naturalist driving the boat back in the summer. And if you haven't taken this pontoon boat across the lake and enjoyed seeing some of the wildlife up close, this is your best way to see a water mouse when you're on the boat and the snakes in the water. But these kids were looking for one. Also, if you enjoy fishing, of course, that's another great way to get out and get next to nature. As you can see, that dog's just about to volunteer to bring that little brim in. The lake is one of the richest in terms of duckweed. The smallest flowering plant is this little, not the big ones, but the little bitty leaves. There are two species here, and of course the turtle in the middle. But this makes a wonderful food for aquatic wildlife. We have a lot of Yonkapin lilies. The Chickasaw name means roasting ear, and the Indians would gather these for edible nuts. They're just as good as a macadamia nut, and you can have all you want here. Just go out and have yourself. Otherwise, they go out and clog up the lake. So this is one of the American lotus, like the Egyptians used to use. If you cut that stalk, it has a very interesting sap, which instantly makes a fiber. You can let it spring out there, and it's one of the curious things about the lake. We also have spatterdock lilies, or mule's ears, as they're locally called, and there's the duckweed again. These are found all the way up in Alaska, and all the way up in the Rockies, up to around 11,000 feet. So that's quite a different water lily than the ones that we see the big ones here. The rarest of the wildflowers I found here is the copper iris. There's probably some others now even more rare than this, but you don't see this type of iris very often. This is one of West Tennessee's specialties, so watch for it. And of course our naturalist is showing here not a water moccasin, but a yellow-bellied water snake. We have red-bellied, yellow-bellied, and many of the water snakes have a temper though, so you want to treat them with respect and handle them real easy. And if you do, the snake will get the idea you're not going to bother you, and they won't bother you. The Bible says if you bruise a snake's head, they'll, with your heel, they'll bruise your heel. You step on the snake, so you got to watch it. Mainly, you got to look out also for the people that you don't see. Hiding on the backside from the boat passengers are these little green frogs with their hands in their pockets, waiting for a fly to come by. So we have a lot of tree frogs and a lot of amphibious life here, and some record-sized cypress trees. Here's one, there's a ranger standing over beside this one that was 18 feet in diameter over here on the Obion River. It was the world's record tree for a while. It was destroyed in a lightning storm that struck the tree and burned it down. But we have other big trees on the lake which are incredible. It takes a century to grow that buttress, and the knees come out, as you know, for support on the watery soil. So it's an interesting tree. We also had the world's largest cottonwood tree over here in Bessie Bend. It was over 10 feet in diameter, as you can see from that, but a storm has since blown it down. So this is rich soil over here. It grows great stuff. One of the most unusual is this little colonial animal, this little bog box. It's one of the bryozoans that grows here in the lake. It's sort of like something you'd find off a coral reef. But here it is run on a dead stick out in the water. And if you're lucky in the summer, scouts might hear a thunder pump, as it's called, a bittern. We have the American bittern as well as the least bittern here. Over 238 species, I believe, are listed in the Lake Ison Guide, but they're really closer to 275 with the bird club counts that have come through Reelfoot. If you're lucky on the boat, you might see a store or a rail. That's a curious little bird with a little yellow bill. And the rails are not very common. You don't see them in many places. We do have cormorants. My dad remembers in the old days when cormorants would get up in the shallow water and drive the minnows up completely out of the water. They'd just scare them right out of the water, and then they'd gobble them up. And the cormorants in those days and the water turkeys or anhingas were smart enough to do that. It takes a lot of fish working together. As you can see here, one of the colony rats just about to nail the minnow, and they're very good at it. And they ambush them as they come through the water. Now, if you look out and count 8 of those white egrets here in this picture, you can see 4 of them right quick. And if you look carefully, there's another one up there, and then there's some more back in the background. But right behind them was the old crane town, I shot this picture in the 60s. I've been coming up here since I was about 4 or 5 years old, so I love this place. Cranetown had a lot of different herons. They nested as thickly as you can imagine up at the tops of the cypress trees. These are great blue herons here. Fortunately, when Rain Tree Country was filmed, they blasted a ditch into there to get the equipment in, left it open. People came in to fish, finally the birds got scared off. So they moved across the river to a pine grove near Sykes in Missouri, until finally the droppings of the birds literally killed the pine trees as too alkali. Then they moved back down to Dyersburg, and finally a GE flash cube plant cut those trees down. So then, by that time, they decided it was safe to come back to Cranetown, and they're back here again. So we still have it. Now, the flat country over here attracts a lot of wading birds. The backwaters of the Mississippi comes in. You get showbirds like the plovers, sometimes even golden plovers, as well as black-bellied. Right up here, there's a great blue heron again. And this country attracts things like turkey as well. The turkey population has probably always existed here and has rapidly grown since the refuge has protected them. We have a lot of songbirds as well, bobolinks, dick sissels, prairie horn larks. Those are just good examples of the kind of prairie birds that you would expect to find like in Kansas, because this flat country attracts them. We get large numbers of them, like the red-winged blackbirds here, and this place sometimes can get black with ducks, as my dad used to say. Still does. All right, that's a Baltimore Oriole. There used to be Baltimore Oriole nest in the cottonwoods right here beside the museum, but I'm afraid with the parking lot expansion, they probably don't nest anymore. This is a bird that's in decline. There are about 200 species of America's 600 bird species that are in very, very bad decline. We don't know whether they're simply coming back up here and the trees are cut down for bean fields or subdivisions or shopping centers, or they go back to tropical America and they're cut down for coffee plantations, or whether they're hitting cell phone towers on their way, or whether they're getting West Nile virus. We don't know what's happening, but we do know a lot of our songbirds are in trouble, and this is one of them. One of the problems we do know is cowbirds. Almost no place in the world where big open woods are free from cowbirds, and they lay their eggs, and the wood thrush particularly are affected by these. As you can see, this Prothonotary warbler normally likes nest cavities, but that year we couldn't run our air conditioner when they nested there, and they did well fledging off. We put out little boxes along the lake shore, and you see a little yellow wild canary in there. That's what you got here, is a little Prothonotary warbler. Now, every year our bird club comes over and we have a bird count, and this has been a tradition for a long time. They've actually been keeping records here from the Tennessee Academy of Sciences since about 1911. And so that record goes back. It's helpful to know how many bird species used to be here in the old days. The songbird areas of West Tennessee, as you can see here, are mostly ranging along the rivers from Nonconnah Creek, Wolf River, Loosahatchee, Forky Deer and Oban up here, and running Reelfoot Bayou. Those are the Mississippi. Those are the main songbird areas that are left. The rest of the state is mostly a big bean field, as you can see. So these refuges, like Lake Isom, depend on water to keep the habitat. A lot of the year, Isom dries out, and one of the things we need to do is to reconnect the ditch over here by the spillway. We need to block up that ditch. We need to take out the highway department spillway, which no fish has ever been able to get up above without knocking his brains out by the third or fourth ladder. And we need to restore the migration. In the old days, the fish used to go over and swim into Lake Isom, lay their eggs, and the little fishes, by the time they were big enough, would swim back into Reelfoot, and we had the world's greatest fish hatchery. That's not been possible since that ditch was straightened out and the highway fish works has been set up. So we need to restore that. If we do that, then we can have fish back in Reelfoot with the abundance that we once had, like we see the geese and ducks that we have here now in such abundance. This is Round Lake over in Moss Island, over to the west of Reelfoot here on Mississippi. The Wildlife Agency has acquired a number of wetland areas, And you can see, besides Reelfoot Lake, the ducks are very grateful. And they in the winter especially need to keep these water areas open to keep the coyotes and the foxes at night from catching them. And they paddle all night to do that. And they've kept them open. In the wintertime, we see ringbills and Franklin gulls and many other species coming down. They used to go to the Gulf, but we now have about 530,000 acres of reservoirs and lakes in Tennessee, and that's been a great attraction. So many of the waterfowl, like the great blue heron, have been on the increase in Tennessee. And the snow geese, oh boy, good breeding has been outdone with them. Their populations are so great, they come back from the Arctic and they just need to get more and more of them. I don't know what we're going to do. But they're a very impressive sight over on the north end of the lake if you saw this evening about sundown. So as a goose flies down from the Arctic Circle in Alaska and comes down to Reelfoot and the Mississippi Flyway, this is the promise they see as they look out and discover these little places that are left. As I say, Reelfoot Lake up here, the forks of the Oban, the forks of the Fork Deer, the Big Hatchie, the Loosahatchee, Wolf River, and Nonconnah. These are still little riparian rivers of life, which are green and provide refuge. And you know, if you guys don't have a warm place to go tonight, you wouldn't make it. It's a cold night. So these critters have got to have a refuge, some little home where they can go, where they can survive. And that's what it's all about. This evening we saw lots of geese over here at the Fish and Wildlife Refuge, waterfowl viewing platform, and also at Black Bayou. Albert took us by there this evening, and the ducks are coming in. There's also a great little pier down in the state woods below Walnut Log. If you want to go down that way, you usually see turkey down there if you're early. And take your big camera if you've got one. If you're not, take your little camera. If you're not, take your field glasses. And if not, take your eyeballs, because there's always something going on down there. And if you haven't been over to Tiptonville to see the art gallery that Albert Markham has set up over there, he's got some of the best wildlife pictures. Not all of it are his, but most of them are. And Albert, you're here tonight, and tell us where your place is. You're on what address? 307 Church Street. Just go straight ahead. Just go through the red, the stop light up there, and keep straight ahead. And it's on your left. And what are your hours?
8 to 5 when we go by.
All right. Any of you guys can get back and go by. I promise you, you'll enjoy seeing some of the great pictures he's got. Here's one he loaned me of the white pelicans. I've never caught a good picture of them over here, but pictures are when they happen. You have to be there. Being there is everything. So Albert's been here. David Haggard, our naturalist, also a great photographer, has been here. And these are the birds who have about a 10-foot wing spread. These are pretty impressive birds. And when you see about 80 of them, as I believe Albert told me we had stopped by here. Have we had them got back in this year? Yes. When were they here?
The last one we saw was probably in mid-December.
Great, great. So come back and watch for those. And of course, occasionally we get brown pelican. They come up from the south. In fact, these are the birds that Teddy Roosevelt was trying to save when he set aside the first refuge. The first wildlife refuge wasn't much bigger than this building at Pelican Island. These are the same birds. They have a wing spread of about 8 to 10 feet. They have an incredible bill, as you can see. When they hit the water, that thing balloons out and it makes a black hole. And all the little fishes say, oh, a cave, I'll swim in there where it's safe. And the pelican says, I got you. So one of our founders of the Tennessee Bird Club in 1915 wrote, what a wonderful bird is the pelican. His beak holds more than his belly can. He can take in that beak enough food for a week, and I'll be darned if I know how in the world he can. And so this is a pelican, which is one of the things to watch for. Now, about last year, we had some guys dressed up in white sheets over in East Tennessee, and they weren't KKK. They were flying these ultralight aircraft leading whooping cranes. And the whooping cranes had never seen a man up close. All they ever see is this great big white bird in a white sheet. And so the man plays the whooping crane bird sounds with a loudspeaker, and when he gets down to the landing place each night, somebody down there already has the birds on another loudspeaker. He turns his off, the ground guy turns his on, and the bird says, oh, somebody said sit down here and have supper. So they do. So this is how they are teaching young whooping cranes to how to fly from the north where they're born back down to Florida for the winter. And now this is over at the Hiawassee River Refuge north of Chattanooga, and I hope you all will go over there and see that. Put it down for February the 7th and 8th. Saturday the 8th is when they have an all-day program at Birchwood School at the Hiawassee Refuge. You will see thousands, at least 5,000 of these sandhill cranes which come in there, and if you're lucky, you might see a white whooping crane, which is one of the rarest birds. They got down to about 16 birds. That was all that were left, and they've bred them back now to several hundred. So we hope they will survive. So this is the Crane Festival. This was from last time when it was February, but it's February the 8th and 9th, that weekend. So go to bed and get to it. And remember that birds like this were almost rubbed out. We had probably over 1.5 billion of these passenger pigeons. John James Audubon watched them darken the skies over St. Louis as a flock flew over for 3 days. Can you imagine that? How many birds that would have been? We had passenger pigeons. We had Carolina parrots or parakeets, which ate cockleburs, and we sure could use somebody eats cockleburs now. And we've had these great ivory-billed woodpeckers. All of these were here at one time. They're now all extinct. So that's what we got to remember, is how easily things can happen like this. So it's important for you boys and girls, give a hoot. So you don't go extinct with them, because we're all connected. I shot this picture out on the lake one day when I was out, and about that time a shadow passed over me, and it was Mother Owl, and she had a long mustache and a big water snake that she caught for lunch. So I paddled out of there, let them alone. But one of the great things when I was a student at college in Memphis was to meet Mr. R.C. Donaldson. This museum would not be here if he had not donated his collection from Tiptonville, and that part of it's on display in the other room. We need to put more of it out because it's one of the great Indian relic collections, and it shows you how many hundreds of native peoples lived here, and they lived well. They made these weapons, they made these pipes and pots. They cooked the animal food and the fish and the corn and vegetables. They lived a good life. And they made things like this little tobacco pipe. The smoke, as the prayer would carry upwards in the smoke of the tobacco fire. The tobacco for them was a medicine. It was not smoked out of habit. And this little pipe was found over here near Sandburg, in one of the mountains when they were building the dam over there. We were able to buy these mountains up on top. There's a view of the lake you can see in the distance. And this is one of the northern areas where the Mississippi River Trail starts and goes south to Memphis. And it stretches together a lot of wonderful places. You can see our naturalist here and the Mississippi River Trail Committee walking over the boardwalk out here behind the building. And they decided to connect a trail that would link the beauty of the Mississippi River. There's sandbars like this along the Mississippi are really as beautiful as any in Pensacola. There are not as many bikinis. They're not as well known, but they're not crowded. So I encourage you to get out and discover on the way places where the Chickasaw Bluff Trail still runs. Some of you scouts might like to volunteer to help cut some more of this trail. You might like to take your field trip down to see the Choctaw play stickball at Chucalissa, where the Mississippi River Trail winds up down on the south end. These are native Choctaw Indians who still play the old games. Maybe you'd enjoy stopping off at Fort Pillow, where a Civil War battle occurred here, and that's along the trail just past Ripley. We had a dedication of the trail here in Henning, Tennessee. Mayor Fred Montgomery, at the birthplace of Alex Haley boyhood home, enjoyed dedicating this part of the Mississippi River Trail as a bikeway, and we've had a lot of people enjoy it since then. So this is one of the great connectors which links a lot of the wetlands that has a lot of wildlife on it, as well as Reelfoot. Down in Shelby Forest, the trail then goes from there, where I started work when I was about 16, down to Memphis, where this trail runs along the Chickasaw Bluff here and goes past the city. This is one of the great views where they have a sunset symphony and a party down there in May, which you shouldn't miss. It's a great opportunity to hear some good music, some good jazz, and to enjoy a picnic on Old Man River. You don't plant taters, you don't plant cotton, them that do them soon forgotten. the Old Man River just keeps rolling along. And as we saw the towboats today waiting over here to wait their turn to get by the sandbar, we know how important this river is, not just to barge traffic, but to a lot of wildlife that have no other place to go. These bird watchers, the wildlife officer, out looking for least turns. Turns out that these birds, only about 1,000 of them, were using the Mississippi River sandbars, and they don't build any nests, they just lay their eggs and hope somebody doesn't step on them or run an ORV over them. And they've been able to keep on living here, and the river in the summertime is a fairly low level, so they've survived. Also, we get glossy ibis sometimes on the islands that come up. These are, we think of as Florida birds, but they used to be here. And they come back through, they have this downturn bill because they're able to catch bugs and worms in the earth. And of course, this is the Mississippi Flyway, which is the most important wildlife corridor that migrates from Alaska breeding grounds, where there are lots of skeeters to eat, all the way down here for the winter, and then on down to Mexico and Latin America, and as far down as Argentina for some of the Broadway crops. So this is an important flyway. What our wildlife agency has been trying to do through their state ornithologists is to look and see where we find these things like the songbirds, the shorebirds, and where the habitats are, and where they migrate to. And to try to save some of these spots where they can stop off and keep from getting shot or keep from getting paved over. And so it turns out that the western part of Tennessee is part of the great Middle America bird conservation area. And down here on the Hatching River, the Lower Refuge, the Anderson-Tully Tract, all of these great places have been put together. And these are some of the most important wildlife areas we have in our state. And these are being acquired with money from the real estate transfer tax. And we've gradually gotten some wonderful wild areas put together. This is part of the Big Hatchie. They have an upper refuge near Jackson on Interstate 40. They have a lower refuge now down below Covington on the Hatchie River. And the Hatchie is a wild, scenic river in Tennessee. That means it's not dammed or channelized. Along the way, you find old river stages like Stunk Lake, another one of the earthquake scatters. You know, the earthquake didn't just make Reelfoot stop. It made Open Lake, Sunk Lake, and Lake Isom, all of these scattered areas along the area. This is one of our state natural areas, and Open Lake is not far away from there. It's actually a more open area. I saw two bald eagles while I was taking this picture, but the sign says private, no admittance. So, in fact, it's not open to the public. It was bought up years ago, and it developed by local folks as a campsite, and they enjoy it, and they protected it so far. So it's still there, but it doesn't have public access. So that's why it's important that these places be protected. There's some really beautiful views along the Mississippi that still need to be cleaned up, which people have trashed out, and if they were, they'd make great places for parks and recreation where you can take your boys and girls to go camping along the river. Now, another eagle-eye view north of Reelfoot Lake, looking over into Missouri. This is the Bessie Bend. You can see how narrow it is there. And there's the power plant in Missouri. The Clean Air Act never was enforced that the oil factories like this had to clean up their smokestacks, so they never did. 30 years later now, the Bush administration has just said, oh, well, we won't do that. We'll let them voluntarily do that. We won't force them to it. So I don't know if we'll ever get this one cleaned up, but we need to, because that smoke blows right over Reelfoot Lake. By the way, this narrow neck of the river could easily be cut through if we're not careful. We have a levee there. Years ago, Memphis wanted to build a hydro plant there, but when they checked on it, they found if Old Man River came up and broke through there, it might just keep going on the other side of Crawledge Ridge, all the way down to the Chapalaya in Texas, and leave Memphis and New Orleans on a sandbar. So they decided to forget that idea. So the Old Man River, you've got to watch out for. So if you love Reelfoot Lake, lately we've had a renaissance over here of trying to save the lake. A legislative task force was organized. Our Congressman Tanner and Commissioner Hamilton, Wildlife Director and local representatives have all worked together. They've gotten the Reelfoot Lake set up where there's a small fee, and that fee is will be used to restore the spillway, and it will be used to do things like operate a cookie cutter to keep the lake open, and it'll be used to reclaim all of the mud that's coming into the lake. At one time, Reelfoot Creek was flowing into 700 acre-feet of mud a year. That's a pretty serious matter. If you had a 700-acre farm and you had 1 year's supply of mud a foot deep, you couldn't get much of a crop out of that. And that's what's been happening to our lake. My dad remembers when Bayou de Chien was open water when he was a kid. Then they had to make a ditch over the north end. By now, most of this is filled in. So this is what we've got to do, is to restore and reclaim. Look at this power pole up here. This is what was right across from the Fish and Wildlife Building. Now look at it 8 years later. You can see the trees planted have grown up, and now a lot of the lake area, as the water's been diverted and the soil has been kept out of the lake. There's a lot more we can do. Actually, I just passed by this pump station just across the Kentucky state line. There's some large farms up here, must be over 20,000 acres. If this pump drains into the Mississippi, if you could turn that pump around and run the Mississippi this way and flush water through the Reelfoot Lake like it used to on a predictable basis, you could clean the mud that's in the lake and we would have the lake restored. That's the way to do it. Maybe someday we can get around to treating the real answer to it. Dropping the lake, as they've talked about doing, is only treating the symptom. It really won't work. Old Man River rises and falls. These periodic floods are so important to the richness of the soil, and we've stopped that with the artificial levees. We need to flush that out again. We have made some of the richest farmland in the world here. The greatest production of corn, beans, and the cotton in the past has been so important here. Unfortunately, in spraying cotton, in order to get a field with no leaves and defoliant, and in order to keep the weeds out of it, we used very strong herbicides like DDT, and we're still spraying a lot of stuff, a lot of fertilizer and a lot of other chemicals. Well, when all these things get together, sometimes they can cause effects we don't think about. For example, there's so much phosphate going down the Mississippi right now that it soaks up the oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico, and there was a 3,000 square mile dead zone all the way from New Orleans, Mississippi River, to the Texas coast where no shrimp were caught. It varies, but this is Reelfoot Lake up here at the spillway, and all of that phosphate was showing up in the lake. When an undergraduate student from Vanderbilt did a study over here, she took a sample to the state health department. They said, "Where did you get this sample?" "You must have got it from a sewage plant." And she said, "No, sir, I got it from Reelfoot Lake." And so they came over and they didn't believe her, and when they tested it, that's what helped to justify the sewage plant that now services Sandburg and Tiptonville, because in fact the water line was so full, there was no place for sewage to go, except more or less right into the lake. So that shows what we can do. I shot this picture in 1963 when at Memphis, a wave of dead fish swept all the way down the Mississippi River. So we knew it was something in Memphis that did it. It wasn't until 15 years later that we traced the sewer back to the Belzicol Company, which was full of inland, which was a cousin of DDT. And that was and still is a very toxic killer. Now they denied that, but there's the dead fish, and there are the barrels. And so you know that all of that stuff finally was written up by Rachel Carson in a book called Silent Spring. And she said if we don't stop putting all this poison out, one of these days there'll be a springtime when no birds will sing because they'll all be dead. She found that 17 earthworms were all it took for robin to eat that had been sprayed with DDT, and then the robin would fall over and die. The coots lately are birds that get out here on the lake and eat just about anything. They've come down with a brain disease, a spongiform disease like mad cow disease, and they give it to the eagles. And over 63 eagles have died in Arkansas because of that. So that's a real serious matter. So we stopped the poisoning of DDT by banning it in the United States in 1972. But we still need to be careful, because although the eggs that the eagles laid didn't hatch, that told us that something was wrong, and we had a precipitous decline. We also had a lot of illegal shooting. We had a loss of habitat, and some people even put out poison bait. Both of these birds were shot by somebody who didn't have any better sense than to shoot our national bird, so they both have only one wing. Well, they can't fly, so they're in an eagle pen like this one out here. And that's a pretty tragic salute, isn't it, for our national bird. So, but gradually we've gotten the word out. I think one of the first convictions was here at Reelfoot Lake from a doctor who shot an eagle, and the guide turned him in because he knew that was the wrong thing for that fellow to do. So the Endangered Species Act has provided a little money and a great encouragement and protection for the eagles. They've allowed volunteers to come in and bring back 284 eagles in Tennessee and release them. 43 of them have been hatched out here and fledged out at Reelfoot Lake. And so they have now resulted in bringing back the eagle programs. Sometimes we get a chick that's blown out of the nest and we don't want it to imprint on the people. So we learned to feed it with a bird's head like that. When it gets a little bigger, we put it in a cage and get it away from people. There's another little house tucked in the bushes over here and a guy wire so you can send fish and water. So the eagles grow up here thinking this is a pretty good place. All this free food and water. And they're protected, of course, inside that cage from anybody like a great horned owl. They might say, eagles are just delicious, like fried chicken. And that can happen because eagles have been known to be driven off the nest by horned owls like this, especially at night. They're really potent. But anyway, these birds have hatched out now. Here's a young eagle. It's been banded with the band from Land Between the Lakes where they released 44 birds. And so now after the last eagle nest in Tennessee was in 61 here at Reelfoot Lake. Then in 83, another eagle hatched out over near Dover on the Cumberland River at Cross Creeks. And now we have had a wonderful renaissance right here behind the museum. Where's the safest place to build an eagle nest? Or right behind the museum, of course. And so that's exactly where one of our first nests appeared. Eagle nest, they just keep adding sticks. They're kind of like where I live, you know, you just keep adding stuff. And the nest can get up to a ton. But we actually had an internet camera, video camera installed up there for a while, so we were able to watch the birds. And I went by, and how many nests have we got now in the lake? 9 nests. Well, that's a wonderful success. For many years at Reelfoot, all you would see was the bald eagles, the mature birds with white heads and feathers. And before I left to come down here yesterday, one flew over my house in Nashville. So that tells me the eagles have returned. They have landed and returned. But now we see the young eagles, which look like hawks. They're all brown for about several years. Now, if you see one that's almost all white underneath, it may be a fish eagle or a fish hawk. We call an osprey. An osprey, how many osprey nests do we have on the lake?
About 14.
14. So the osprey actually do it and always have because the osprey are smaller and more efficient at catching fish. In fact, they're so efficient that when an eagle sees an osprey get a fish, he says, why should I catch a fish when I can just scare the bejabbers out of that little bird and get my own free fish? And that always works. I've never seen an osprey dumb enough yet to hang on because if he did, you know, he'd just be a fish and osprey for double dinner. And so this afternoon, I went over to the Mississippi. It wasn't iced over, but later on, when the ice breaks up north, it can be like this. One day I saw an eagle perched on one of these icebergs, floating down the river like the commodore of a towboat out there, looking for some stupid catfish that wouldn't dream of being dry gulched that way. And that's, I guess, if you just try one thing, try one other. And of course, there's nothing more beautiful than Reelfoot Lake when it freezes like this and the waves come crashing in here. And it's a shallow lake, so you really learn to get out of the way. That's over here by the little Kiwanis area. And the wind comes in there more than any place else, so that's where you get the highest ice up on the trees. But here's my friend Judy, who's in the audience tonight. A few years ago, in '77, I believe, the lake froze so that we walked out on it. You'd be laying there thinking, oh, it must be 6 or 8 inches, and all at once it would go crack. And bang, you hear this sound going across the lake. Makes you a little nervous to get back off of there. But when that happens, it's fun for us, but it's not fun for the eagles. They gotta struggle to get something to eat. They can't go to McDonald's or Boyette's. They gotta go out here. With that day that the lake froze real fast, we saw them circling one commercial fisherman like a bunch of buzzards hoping for a handout. And here they are sitting out like they were today. There were half a dozen sitting out there arguing over one little piece of fish or whatever. And then over the next day, I watched this little drama unfold. Eagle tracks intercepted rabbit tracks. And finally, the rabbit tracks ended. So I knew where the rabbit wound up. But it's fun to watch the young eagles. They're like the rest of us. They have to learn. This eagle thus thought that fox squirrel looked delicious. And every time he'd make a pass, the fox squirrel would scoot around just a few more inches and say, and the eagle finally realized he was just pulling his leg, so he wasn't going to get the fox squirrel there. He was too smart. One day I was over here looking, and I noticed this one eagle was really watching, and I thought, oh, there must be a great fish down there that he's looking at. So I was up on the bluff looking down there from the levee, and when I looked down, that's what he was looking at. All right. And then I realized it wasn't exactly a golden eagle, because, you know, golden eagles don't have white heads. But here's what golden eagles look like. And we've also released some golden eagles at the state. There was a golden eagle nesting on Norris, Tennessee, back in the 1959. We had an eagle nest, but they've since had them hatch out over on the Watts Bar Lake, and we've had another eagle nest hatching out in West Tennessee. So we're lucky to see both of these birds coming back. The golden's a little bit bigger. Now the Native Americans, when they looked at an eagle, they remembered sort of what William Blake, the poet, said. He said, when you see an eagle, lift up thine eyes, for thou seest a portion of genius. And they believed the eagles were sacred. They used the feathers, they used the talons in their eagle dances and in their religious services. And so in order to take care of the Native American rights, the eagles, whenever a bird is killed accidentally, they're sent to an eagle repository. And there's a list, a waiting list of Indians that want feathers, and then they're sent back to the Indians. But this is what the Indians made in honor of the eagle over 2,000 years ago. A white quartz eagle at Rock Eagle, Georgia, down near Athens, and it's still there after all these years. It's amazing, a sacred place to this great bird. And it is our national emblem, and it was sacred to the Western Indians as well. You can see what a mighty war chief. This fellow had a headdress all the way down to his to the ground, and that's how abundant eagles were. We had 500,000 eagles back when the paleface came to America, in the North American continent. They estimate there was one every mile in the Chesapeake Bay area. Wherever there was habitat, there were eagles. But by around 1900, we'd shot most of them out. It's unbelievable. And by the DDT poisoning, by 1962, there were 7 that hatched out at Chesapeake Bay. By 1988, after they had restored them, 188 hatched out. So the eagles have returned. Now, this is an actual page out of the Aztec Codex. This is over 1,000 years old, from Mexico. So it shows you the symbol of the eagle. This looks like one of our flags, but this is an ancient Aztec symbol. And then here is the Mexican symbol of the eagle perched on a cactus eating a snake. And then here's the eagles in our own coins and in our own money. And it was so a symbol in Roman times. So it's quite a bird. And I know as you go out tomorrow and look for eagles, you want to watch for the mature ones with their white head and tail. Watch for the immature, the young ones. Watch for the golden. You probably won't see goldens, but you never know. And the osprey, which are smaller and more white with these black dots. These are right out of Roger Torrey Peterson's little bird book. My first copy of that bird book came from down here in Ridgely, Tennessee, from a friend. If you boys and girls don't have one, then go get you a bird book. And later get you a pair of binoculars so you can see them better. And we need more young naturalists coming on. And then when you get out and take a tour and enjoy seeing the eagles, this is one of the few places where you can get close to them. They're not afraid of us down here because they see us all the time. They're also hoping we'll throw them a fish. And if you see little footballs out here on the top of the trees, they probably aren't. They're probably eagles. So that's what you boys and girls need to watch for. And remember that these are what we call watchable wildlife areas. And places like Reelfoot Lake that we see on the Great River Road are saved by purchase of the Tennessee Wildlife License Plate. I think 22 out of $28 of that goes to save habitat for a watchable wildlife program. This is John Stokes and Al Cecere, American Eagle Foundation. They go around and demonstrate wild birds like this. And here's David Haggard with one of our great eagle examples here from Reelfoot. I hope you'll get out and realize, you know, an eagle has built-in binoculars. They can focus the fovea at the back of their eye and give themselves an 8-power vision, so they can see a fish a mile away or see you just as well as you're seeing them through your binoculars. So indeed, when we see an eagle, we see a piece of genius. This has been our American symbol since 1782, and it's not the end of our eagles. They have returned.